Hello people, welcome to another video. Don't forget to click to subscribe. That does really help me out. It also helps you because then you get to be notified when I make a new video. So this is Frankenstein chapter 13, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the original chapter 13 review. Let's get into it. So the creature in this chapter is revealing a lot of personal growth. Very important. I'll touch on the themes that we're talking about in class. He says, I now hasten to the more moving part of my story. And it's really him sharing his educational experiences. He says he's been watching them. Okay, the cottagers, and this is, as we know, Felix, Agatha, and their father. And they do chores. He's watching them do chores. He's listening, and remember, he's watching through the crack in the window. He's in this little hovel that is attached to the cottage. There's a boarded up window, which he watches and listens through. That's how he's getting this education. Remember that this whole time, the creature is telling Victor the story while they're at the top of the mountain, and the creature is telling Victor how he has become who he is in that gap of time, the 2 years when the creature was not seen by Victor. Also remember that this is Victor telling the story of what the creature told him, and Victor is telling Robert Walton. Robert Walton is writing all this in letters to his sister. So it's the story told by the creature to Victor, and then the story told by Victor to Robert Walton, and then Robert Walton to his sister. So I don't know if you could follow that, but anyway, it's being told a number of times. So the first important thing that happens is that everything is kind of going normally until a woman arrives. So we have the arrival of a new character. It was a lady on horseback accompanied by a countryman as a guide. He gets dismissed. The lady was dressed in a dark suit and covered with a thick black veil. So she's covered with a veil. That's going to be important. Agatha talks to her, and she hears that this woman asks for Felix, and Felix comes over. And then there's a lot of emphasis on the countenance of angelic beauty and expression. She's beautiful, but her presence changes Felix and his countenance, so that really the misery that they have been experiencing, it changes. So this new character is changing all three of the cottagers for the better. So Felix seemed ravished with delight when he saw her. Every trait of sorrow vanished from his face. It kind of goes on. There's some good stuff. He calls her his sweet Arabian. Now, I'll get into that a little bit more in a couple minutes, but add this to your character's map, that in the cottage, we've got the father, we've got Felix, we have Agatha, and then we have now the sweet Arabian. You'll find out her name is Safie a few paragraphs later, Safie, when Felix kisses her hand and says, "Good night, sweet Safie." So they have a very special relationship, which you will find out about soon enough in another chapter. So one thing that the creature notices is that Safie does not speak their language. So the cottagers, obviously they're all family, so they understand each other, but Safie is the sweet Arabian, and she doesn't speak their language. So this turns into a great opportunity for Felix to teach Safie his language, thereby the creature learning the language. So you might be wondering, hey, how did Mary Shelley decide to do this? Well, it works out really well that Mary Shelley says, I gotta have the creature learn a language so that he can communicate with Victor later. So this is a perfect opportunity. He's learning basically elementary language skills from the education of Safie through Felix. So a couple paragraphs later, the one that starts, "The days now passed as peaceably as before," which means everything is going fine. the creature says, she and I improved rapidly in the knowledge of language, so that in 2 months I began to comprehend most of the words uttered by my protectors. So he's really making great progress. You can quote that in your quote journals as a quest for knowledge. Quote. And then the next paragraph is a really nice one about nature. Remember that the creature was just born, it was created about 6 months before. So it was a stormy night in November. That was the famous line. When he comes to life, then he's out there wandering in the countryside, in the forest, alone, getting rejected by people again and again. And this is the first spring that he has experienced. So that's kind of an important piece to note. In the meanwhile, also the black ground was covered with herbage, and the green banks interspersed with innumerable flowers. He's never seen this before. The ground was always covered in snow. He was cold, walking in bare feet on the white snow. Sweet to the scent and the eyes. And then he talks about the stars of pale radiance among the moonlight woods. The sun became warmer, change in weather. The nights clear and balmy. He goes on. And then at the end of that, he says, I never ventured abroad during daylight, fearful of meeting with the same treatment I had formerly endured in the first village which I entered. That's going back toward the isolation. He feels alone. He cannot go communicate with people because, remember, he was soundly rejected by the people, got chased out of town. The shepherd in the field had run away. Remember when he describes that, yeah, this little old guy, like, looked pretty gimpy, but he just took off. So he fears being rejected again. So he is lonely. My days were spent in close attention that I might more speedily master the language, and I may boast that I improved more rapidly than the Arabian. So this quest for knowledge, this kind of obsession with becoming better, it applies to the creature too. He has a special need to learn how to communicate because it is through the communication that he hopes to engage with the cottagers. He gets kind of a large education. In the next paragraph, it says, the book from which Felix instructed Safie was Volney's Ruins of Empires. Goes on, the whole paragraph is filled with really important information. If you want to understand right now how the creature, in talking with Victor at the top of the mountain, is so knowledgeable and he seems to really understand the world, well, he has had this cursory education, Ruins of Empires. If you know how an empire like comes to power and then it runs everything for hundreds of years and then it kind of gets taken over by some other empire. If you look at the Egyptians, if you look at the Greeks, if you look at the Romans, if you look at the British Empire, all this expansion, Mary Shelley is kind of commenting on it a little bit in this paragraph because the British Empire had been expanding into Africa, into India, into the Americas. And at the end of this paragraph, it says, I heard of the discovery of the American hemisphere and wept with Safie over the hapless fate of its original inhabitants. So this is 200 years ago. Everybody recognized that what happened to the Native Americans, the Aztecs, the Incas, that their civilizations were wiped out, not just from war and fighting. It was that, but more completely by illness, the invisible killer, the tuberculosis that came, different diseases where they did not have an immune system that could handle all the things that had been spreading around Europe for such a long time. And so the creature, it's important to note, he's weeping in sadness because of the empathy he feels for these other cultures. So he's really kind of coming a long way. Also, they touch upon, there's an insult there. I heard of the slothful Asiatics. That's a comment, that perhaps is a Mary Shelley thing. She's talking about the Eastern cultures, but saying more like slothful, or that's lazy is how she's describing. The stupendous genius and mental activity of the Grecians and the Romans. Then you're looking at kind of a cursory education of the Western civilizations in terms of chivalry, Christianity, and kings. You think of like England and France and all that. And then the whole Mediterranean region and the Christian and education of Christ, which all is spreading out throughout Europe at this time. Now, these wonderful narrations. So we go on in the next paragraph at the end. This is really important to pick up. He makes a comment about killing, okay? For a long time, I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments. But when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased, and I turned away with disgust and loathing. You can imagine if you're innocent, and then you hear of a mankind, doing something terrible to another man, to take his life, not just a man, but men and women, but I'm using the terms that are old-fashioned, to take someone's life, he turns away with disgust and loathing at even the thought of death and killing. Now remember, we know a little bit about what has happened with William and Justine, but we're still disconnected with that whole thing. So this is in the beginning. This is in the beginning when he is exposed to this idea of murder. He turns away with disgust. Note that, okay? Next paragraph, he's talking about, in order to have status in society, people in their time need to have money. And he's like, oh gosh, well, I don't have money, and neither do my cottagers. But they have each other. He makes some really good quotes, good comments here. And what was I? Of my creation and creator, I was absolutely ignorant, but I knew that I possessed no money, no friends, no kind of property. I was, besides, endued with a figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even of the same nature of man. He says, I was more agile. Remember, he's got like superhuman strength than they, and could subsist upon a coarser diet. He doesn't need like regular foods. I bore the extremes of heat and cold with less injury to my frame. It means that the cold doesn't bother him, the hot doesn't bother him. My stature far exceeded theirs. He's the big giant guy. When I looked around, I saw and heard none like me. Boy, that's isolation. That is loneliness. That is him being alone in the world. Not just living alone, not just separated geographically, alone, the only one like it. Was I then a monster, a blot upon the earth, from which all men fled and whom all men disowned? So, ouch, that's a really painful comment. And then the next paragraph, he says, I cannot describe to you the agony that these reflections inflicted upon me. He's telling Victor, I cannot tell you, this is agony. I tried to dispel them, but sorrow only increased with knowledge. That could be loss of innocence theme right there. Oh, that I had forever remained in my native wood. The phrase, ignorance is bliss, to not be told all the information, to not know everything. It really is kind of happy when you just don't really know what's going on. You can just pretend that everything is just fine. That's what he's saying. He's like, now I really know a lot, and it's kind of painful. Later in that paragraph, he says, oh, of what a strange nature is knowledge. It clings to the mind when it has once seized on it like a lichen on the rock. Great simile there. And then he says he doesn't, but I learned that there was one means to overcome the sensation of pain, and that was death. A state which I feared yet did not understand. He doesn't understand what death is like. Later in that same paragraph, it's this isolation. He does not have the love of a woman. Very, very important. Companionship. In an allusion, which is not here, if you think about the creation story back at the beginning, that if you have Adam and Eve, you have Eve created for Adam. He says, I'm like the Adam, but he doesn't have an Eve. And if Victor is the creator, it's like, you made me alone. And so this hurts him, and he's trying to communicate this to Victor. So, very important. Dun, 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 foreshadowing. And then he says, gosh, the gentle words of Agatha and the animated smiles of the charming Arabian were not for me. Isolation. The mild exhortations of the old man and lively conversation of the loved Felix were not for me. And that's just the companionship. Because of his appearance, he cannot have social companions. Miserable, unhappy wretch. Very important. Skip that next paragraph. I mean, don't skip it, obviously. Read the whole thing. But the next one after that, but where were my friends and relations? No father had watched my infant days. This is all right to Victor. It's like, in your face, Victor, you did this. No father had watched my infant days. No mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses to be loved. Or if they had, all my past life was now a blot. It's a memory. It's a blank spot. It's a blackness, darkness. And then he says, I had always been in this same height and proportion. I had never yet seen a being resembling me or who claimed any intercourse with me. And that would be any type of exchange of ideas, no relationship. Okay, so he's not talking about a marriage relationship or anything, even though that is what he would eventually desire. The question again was to be answered only with groans. And so it wraps up in that last paragraph. He says, I will soon get back to my story of the cottagers. So anyway, a lot of great character revelation here for the creature. And he feels very, very alone. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. Keep reading. It's such a great story. We'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.